Thank you very much, Beatrice. Thank you very much for being here. So the question is, should we be free market environmentalists? And my answer is no. And this is not because I don't take our relationship with nature seriously. Actually, I think our relationship with nature is an issue of life and death. If we make mistakes in the way we relate with nature, it can have very, very devastating consequences. But exactly because I believe that it is important to understand what our relationship with nature should be, this is exactly why I'm not an environmentalist. Because I think that environmentalism as an ideology, as a philosophy, but also the environmental movement get completely wrong what is our relationship with nature. Now, when I say about a movement or a set of ideas or a philosophy, whether it is good or whether it is bad, what is my criteria? What is my standard? How do I evaluate a movement as good or as bad? And I have only one standard. I have only one criterion. And that criterion is human life. That criterion is human flourishing, which means the good life. For me, the way to judge something is does it contribute to human beings having a life that will be long, healthy, prosperous, creative, meaningful. That's what I mean by human flourishing. This is my standard. This is why, for example, I am so passionate about the idea that is important to all of us, the idea of freedom. Because how can you have a flourishing life without freedom? We need freedom, first of all, to figure out what is going to make life meaningful to us. And for each one of us, it's a different answer. We need the freedom to understand the world. We need freedom to figure out what we do, to create, to produce, to innovate. This is why freedom is not just a luxury, not something that we use in sunny days, but freedom is an existential necessity. In order to live a good life, not just to survive, like a prehistoric person in a cave, but to live the good life, we need freedom as much as we need to breathe, literally. Within this context, though, the context, let's say, of the good life, of the flourishing life, what is then our relationship with nature? Our relationship with nature is that we constantly need to intervene in our environment. We constantly need to improve our environment. Because what we're facing is not nature which is pristine and pure and friendly towards us. If this was the case throughout history of humanity, life expectancy wouldn't be 30 years old. What we find out there is a nature which is constantly posing threats to us, challenges to us. So what we need to do is we need to shape nature in a way that accommodates our needs. We need to build shelters. We need to build roads in order to have free trade, as we mentioned in the previous discussion. We need to fight the predators that nature unleashes against us. And by mastering nature, by putting, let's say, by exerting control over nature, actually, we make our environment safer. And of course, we're facing many challenges today. Climate change is one of these challenges. But think about it. Was there any time in human history that nature was safer for human beings? Safer in terms of dying from floods, dying from extreme weather, extreme cold, extreme heat. So if you see climate-related deaths in the last 200 years at the time of the Industrial Revolution, they've gone down like that. So the more we intervene with nature and doing it right using our mind, the safer we make our natural environment. And also something else, the more we intervene in nature, the more we master nature, the more able are we to enjoy nature. to appreciate nature as something beautiful, not as something which is after to kill us. Can you imagine trying to have a hike without your plastic shoes, your plastic-made backpack, without your phone where if you are lost, someone comes to find you? Within the industrial civilization, which is the civilization of mastery over nature, a hike is a beautiful experience. Without the industrial civilization, a hike is literally a horror movie. So this is my standard when I evaluate a movement. Is it good for human life and human flourishing? And that's my only standard. That's why I reject communism, I reject fascism, and that's why I'm passionate for freedom. Now, the crucial question is this a standard which is shared by environmentalism and the environmental movement? If environmentalism shares this standard that yes, our number one priority is human life and human flourishing, then we can say, look, we disagree on some things with these people, but we agree on the basics. Therefore, we can be allies. And my not so hot take today is that this is not the standard of environmentalism. Human life and human flourishing is not the standard of environmentalism. And I will prove it to you. Actually, environmentalism has a different standard. The standard is having as little impact on nature as possible. It's not making nature more hospitable to human beings. It's more protecting nature from human beings. And let's see why this is the case. Let's have a very quick 3-minute crash course in the history of environmentalism. And the environmental movement comes around in the 1960s, which is a time where many ideas that question industrial society are very popular. These are the ideas of the counterculture, the ideas of the new left. And these are ideas that tell us that all the aspirations that common people have to own stuff, to have a nice house, to travel, to, God forbid, consume, that this is something bad. They even tell us that technology and science is something to be questioned. That is something very central in the new left. And they are telling us that human aspiration itself is a problem, which was something big and new. At least the old left was pretending to tell us that, you know what, we follow us and we're going to have more stuff. The new left is telling us, follow us so that we make sure that you have less stuff, literally. Now, within this intellectual framework, it's not surprised that environmentalism took that route that it took. And actually, it's even worse. Because very soon, it wasn't a movement against human aspiration, but it was a movement against human beings themselves. Who was the first very prominent environmentalist? When I say very prominent, he was appearing at what was the equivalent of the Joe Rogan show of the time on Prime TV. It was a guy called Paul Ehrlich. He wrote a book in '68 called The Population Bomb. And his idea was there are too many human beings on planet Earth. And this guy, it's something unbelievable. He's still around, by the way. He's been around for what, like 50 years? And he's given all these catastrophic predictions. And every time he's wrong. He reminds me of this cartoon, you know, the coyote and the beep beep. Who is the guy who fails all the time? This is Paul Ehrlich for you. But he did something disastrous. He had an impact in a culture that said that there are too many human beings out there. Now think about it. What does it mean to say there are too many human beings? It means that now humanity is a threat. To whom? To nature. But what does this mean? It means that now your standard is not human life, your standard is nature. And now suddenly humanity is a threat. In the 1970s, environmentalism gets its own philosophy. It's a philosophy that was called deep ecology. And it had some of its leaders, someone like the philosopher Arne Naess. And deep ecology is a movement that the basic message is green collectivism and green egalitarianism. Collectivism because its main message is the earth is one. It's one body. They call it the Gaia. And every single living organism is a cell within that body. But here's the trick, and here's where the egalitarianism comes in. The message is that every living being is of equal value. So deep ecology is a reaction to the idea that humanity is special, is a reaction to anthropocentrism. Anthropocentrism, what does that mean? I'm Greek, I mean, it's a Greek word, but simply it's a reaction against the Enlightenment. The reaction against the idea that human being is the measure of all things. And I realize that someone might hear the phrase, all living beings are equal, and you might say, yeah, this is cute. I mean, no, I love cats, I'm a nerd for whales, I love living beings. But here's the trick. Try to think what is the logical conclusion of thinking and claiming that all living beings, whether it's animals, human beings, plants, are equal. And actually, you don't have to think it. One famous deep ecologist did a thought experiment that makes this very, very clear. He said, picture this. You're in a mountain and it's very cold, it's snowing outside. And there is a hut, a small house in the mountain. And within the house, there is a baby in a cradle and a snake. Now, if you throw out the baby, obviously it dies. If you throw out the snake, it dies. If you leave the baby with the snake, you figure out what happens. And he asked a simple question, what do you do? And the implication was that if you take out the snake to save the baby, you're not a true radical, you're not a true deep ecologist. And in the following years, we saw many such misanthropic views from deep ecology. There were deep ecologists who said that, should we really help Africa with its hunger? Should we really alleviate the hunger in Africa? I mean, do we really need more people, quote unquote, I mean, they meant Africans around? They were the people who, when the HIV pandemic, when HIV came out in the 80s, they said that this is the natural defense of planet Earth against people. Therefore, maybe it's something to be welcomed. Now, I know what will be your objection. You will say, look, Nikos, you are doing here something very sneaky. You found like the two worst crazy people in the environmental movement, and you are straw-manning the whole movement like that. These are just outsiders. Well, are they? How many times have you heard the phrase, human beings are a plague on Earth? I've heard it many times. I've heard it many times from people who are celebrated, from people who are celebrities. I mean, what happened to these deep ecologists? They after that, they stood in the boards of respectable groups. A guy even got his prime TV show. Do you know Captain Paul Watson? He was the guy who was sabotaging the whale ships. He got like the equivalent of a Netflix show. But forget for a second these crazy guys. I mean, do you remember during COVID this horrible phrase that says nature is healing? I hated this so much. But if you think about it, it is it follows perfectly from this idea that if your standard is nature, then indeed human beings dying is something which is good for nature. I mean, it's bad for human beings, but who cares about that? But let's forget the radical environmentalists. Let's go to the most moderate environmentalists. Because you could say, look, obviously they don't share this standard, the standard of having as little impact in nature. And I would say then think again. Let's take the issue again of climate change, which is again very important, and I totally recognize this. Supposedly, environmentalists want to make sure that we get rid of dirty forms of energy, and you would expect that then they would be in favor of cleaner forms of energy that also make sure that we have energy and we don't die. Because, I don't know if you've understood it, higher prices of energy or lack of energy for us is just an inconvenience. Like, where am I going to charge my iPhone? Or, oh my God, my electricity bill is too high. For billions of people, it's an issue of life and death. So how does the mainstream environmental movement deal with nuclear energy, for example? Literally zero emissions. You would expect they would be full in favor, right? Of course, they're radically opposed to it. Radically opposed to it. Now you could say, okay, Nikos, you know what? But there's this there's the danger of an accident or what we do with nuclear waste, which all these answers are obviously very easy to find. Okay, let's say they are scientifically literate. What about hydroelectric power? Can we all agree? Hydroelectric power, literally zero emission. The major environmental groups are against also hydroelectric power. Do you know why? Because it interferes with the migration routes of some types of fish, like salmon. Notice again their standard here. Who cares about people having cheap energy, having the energy that they need to live? What about the salmons? But I will give you the last example, which some of you might find silly, but I think it's the most telling about what we're dealing here. Do you remember the plastic straws? I'm from Greece. We drink our Freddo espresso or frappe. We love our plastic straws. Actually, I have a stock of plastic straws that will take me through the apocalypse. Notice how much energy the green movement has spent in banning plastic straws. And my question to you is a very simple one. Why? Are plastic straws really a threat to anything that has to do with nature? If you do your research, it takes like 20 seconds of Googling. You will notice that the vast amount of plastics in the oceans comes from societies that have nothing to do with Western capitalist societies. But from that plastic, actually someone did the math. The percentage of the plastic in the ocean which comes from plastic straws is 0.00000. It's like 2 lines of zeros, 0.1%. And you mention this to an environmentalist and you ask them, so what's the point? And at the end of the discussion, do you know what they'll tell you? They'll tell you, well, at least we're doing something. You're doing something towards what? You're not saving anything. You're not protecting anything. You're doing something in terms of, oh, at least we pay our dues, we suffer, we give up something. Oh. So then your goal is not even to protect something. You want to make sure that we feel uncomfortable, that we give up something. In that case, I can see clearly what your standard is. And your standard is that basically you've become a nihilist. You don't stand for something, you just want to put a cost on an activity that doesn't harm anyone. So this is why, at the end of the day, I think that environmentalism is, first of all, incompatible, obviously, with freedom, but most importantly, it's incompatible with human life. Because its standard is having as little impact in nature as possible. But life requires impact on nature. Lack of impact has a different name, and that name is death. We cannot survive without having impact on nature. And as long as we are free and we want to live good lives, we will have impact in nature. And because environmentalism is radically opposed to that, I want to shout from the rooftops that I am not an environmentalist. And just one more thing. Personally, I think that free market environmentalism is conceding so much to an ideology that doesn't deserve it. It fails to understand what environmentalism really stands for. I mean, imagine this. Imagine if someone looked, let's say a movement we all agree is horrible. Let's say someone looked at fascism and they said, well, look, fascists wanted the trains to run on time. Fascists were against bank robbers. Well, I want the trains to run on time. I'm against bank robberies. Therefore, I'm going to call myself a free market fascist. No. The essence of fascism is not that the trains run on time. The essence of fascism is the naked collectivism. and authoritarianism. And equally, the essence of environmentalism is not reducing pollution. The essence of environmentalism is something completely different. And I will finish with this. If we keep letting people be free, we're going to make our environment more and more hospitable and safe to us. We're going to deal with challenges like climate change, and we're going to go through it. We're going to fix it, again, by using our mind and ingenuity, the thing that made the environment so hospitable for us for the first time in human history. So freedom and a safe environment goes hand in hand. Freedom and environmentalism, no, they cannot go together. It's either or. It's either freedom or environmentalism. And every day of the week, I choose freedom. Thank you.